This is the SFFaudio Podcast.
This is Jesse.
And I'm Scott.
Hi guys, this is Brian Murphy. I'm a short-time reviewer on SFFaudio. I'm with the Silver Key blog that Jesse's generously linked to a few times. And I'm very happy to be on the show. Thanks for having me on, guys.
You bet. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you. In person, as it were. Yeah, the Silver Key blog is at thesilverkey.blogspot.com. And you've always got really nice stuff on that blog. I really enjoy it.
Me too.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. It's been going now for a little over a year, and I don't know why I decided at this point in my life to start it up. I'm 35. I've always enjoyed fantasy. I've been a lifelong reader. And I think it was just, I was telling Jesse before, I used to do a lot of book reviews the old-fashioned way, where I just write them down in a 3-ring binder, just because my memory's a little bit shaky at times. So I didn't want to forget some of these observations I had made while reading. So I used to do these reviews on my own and kind of personal. And I thought, it's not like I don't want to share these, and then I know the blogging software has evolved to a point where anyone, even a, technological fool like myself can start up a blog, and it's pretty easy to use. And that's what kind of got me over the top. And I've just enjoyed doing it. I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. Maybe when I eventually run out of ideas. But there's so much out there to talk about, and so much new material that I just enjoy doing it. And I see myself continuing.
Well, that's good. That's great. Yeah, I noticed there's two things on your blog fairly recently that I'd love to talk to you about that haven't appeared on SFFaudio in any way, but they're both audio. The first one is Seamus Heaney's Beowulf.
Yes.
What did you think of that? And you listened to that, right? That was an audiobook, was it not? That was
an audiobook. It was read by Seamus Heaney himself. And it was one of the better, I guess you call it reads. I always wonder how you talk about an audiobook. Do you read an audiobook, you listen to an audiobook? But it was a great recording. Seamus Heaney is the translator and editor of the poem, and he also is the reader. And if you like the sound of words, if you like, it's a little out of the ordinary in that it's an old poem, and it's full of alliteration. It's more of, as I wrote in my review, Beowulf's a story where if you look at it from a distance, not a lot happens. I mean, you have a monster that's harassing a hall. You have a call for help. You have a hero come over the sea to stop the threat. And then you have him go on, and then the poem picks up from about 50 years later in Beowulf's life, where a second threat comes up, which is in the form of a dragon, and he kind of has to strap on his armor once again. To use a sports analogy, it's kind of like a great athlete coming out of retirement to save the day one more time. And that's pretty much the whole story. So there's not a lot going on in Beowulf. It's pretty action-packed. It's pretty brief. But what makes that particular recording great is just the words and the allusions he uses. He calls a boat a wave skimmer. I'm trying to remember some of the other particular turns of phrase he uses when he's describing. Let's see, the sun is the world's candle, the ocean's a whale road. You call it a gleaming sword is a battle torch. I mean, if that's what you like, if you like, some people might find that, as I wrote, a little tedious. Some people want to they consider fiction just a way to get, to talk about the story and kind of be transparent. Whereas I think a big draw of Beowulf is that the words that he uses are in many ways the story and in many ways the draw. So I thought it was terrific. Very different than what you typically get in a
it sounds good. Sounds really good.
Sounds like something I'd definitely be interested in. Yeah, I've got
I bet you heard it.
I've got to mention here one guy, though, before we move on. There's a fella named Michael D.C. Drout, who we've reviewed him a couple times on SFF Audio for the classes he's done. He did one on science fiction and one on fantasy. Do you remember those, Jesse?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do.
Anyway, he's a professor of Old English and Middle English and medieval literature and things. And anyway, he recorded Beowulf in whatever language. Is it Old English or Middle English? I can't remember which. Anyway, he recorded it in the language. And I have that CD, and I listened to it. You know, obviously, I'm not understanding very much of it, but it's almost like music. You know, the rhythm of it and the pronunciation of it is really something else.
It's the old vowel shift before the vowel shift, so it doesn't sound normal.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, anyone who wants to check him out, he's at wormtalk, wormtalk.blogspot.com.
I'll have to write that down myself.
Okay.
I love the Neil Gaiman movie.
You know,
I don't think a lot of people do, but I really liked it.
You know, it changed the story. There was some things I liked about it, some things I didn't like. It made Beowulf more of a character from a modern novel. You know, it kind of gave him more of a background, more of a motivation. I don't want to spoil the movie for people who haven't seen it, but it certainly makes Beowulf's mother, who's a very minor character in the original poem, it makes the story focused really on her. There's some questions about who Grendel's father is, and obviously it ties back to the mother and Beowulf and Hrothgar, whose hall Beowulf comes to the rescue of. You know, it makes it much more of a it makes it much more appealing to, I think, the modern reader, in that it does infuse these characters with a lot of motivation and a lot of background. And some people say it makes the actual character of Beowulf a little unlikable. He's a little more of a braggart than he is, I think, in the poem. He does boast a little bit in the poem, and I think that was, you know, I'm not a student of
that's the morality English, back then.
Yeah, that was the morality back then. There was a lot more of that. Of course, you had to back it up, and you know, many of these guys died backing up what they talked about. But that was the way to go. You know, you wanted to die on a battlefield. But that's modern
rapper too. You know, like that's the modern rapper, a gangster rapper. You know, I'm the baddest guy ever, sort of thing. Right?
You know,
it's the same idea.
You're right in a way. It is. I mean, I hadn't really made that connection before, but you know, that was the way to go. It was
the story.
You didn't want to die. You didn't want to die on a bed in your sleep. You wanted to die with a sword in your hand, so you'd be, you know, guaranteed passage to Valhalla.
Vikings are rappers.
Yeah. Of course, the thing about Beowulf is too that it was written at a time where Christianity was starting to gain traction, and there's a lot. That's the other thing I should recommend about the audiobook. It kind of mixes the old pagan ways with the coming of Christ and Christianity, and it's got some depth to it in that regard too.
Yeah, it sounds really good.
Yeah, it really does. All right.
Cool.
Yeah, now if we shift gears, the other thing that I saw that interested me quite a bit was you took a look at Stephen King's first novel, which was fairly recently released on audio, Carrie, and it was read by Sissy Spacek, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Okay. I've heard that one, and I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah, she did a fantastic job. You know, she's a great actress. I don't know what she's done recently, to be honest with you. I haven't been following her career per se, but she was terrific in Carrie, the original film. One of those. As we all know, Stephen King's track record of movies made out of his books is not very good. I thought Carrie was one of the better ones. And this was something that a lot of audiobooks that I find are, you know, I find them in the library, and I used to be a big Stephen King disciple, I call myself. I thought he was pretty much the only author worth reading for a couple of years of my young life. When I first started to really read novels, I just consumed myself with Stephen King. I read everything he had written up to that point, and then this was probably in the mid to late 80s, and then I started to read his newer stuff, and it didn't connect quite as well with me, some of the stuff he produced in the late 80s and early 90s, and I think that was the time this full-blown drug and alcohol problem, in which he's talked about at length. I'm not disclosing anything here, but he's that kind of, I think, affected his writing for a little while. But his early stuff, Carrie all the way through Misery, I think I talked about, was terrific. And Carrie is not, I don't think it's one of his better novels. It's his first effort. He's since talked about it in some interviews I've read where he likened it, I think somewhere, it's maybe been in the foreword to an unfinished cookie, to a cookie cooked by a first grader, actually. He said it was doughy, kind of burned on the bottom, but it still tastes really good. I kind of like that description of the novel.
Stephen King's mom liked it.
Yeah, but it's a great little story, and there's a lot going on in there. He some of his concepts he explores in more detail later on. Again, it goes back to religion, I think, to some degree. Carrie's mother is a strict practitioner of Christianity, and she's very literal both with the Bible, and she's keeps Carrie cooped up and doesn't allow her to wear dresses that come up beyond her ankles, and teaches her about have hellfire and brimstone for anybody who steps outside these strict and narrow lines, and of course that affects Carrie. She becomes a target in her high school of a lot of
That's one of the
verbal
things I like
abuse,
most
and
about Stephen King in general.
Really comes to a head, and meanwhile.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, one of the things I like most about Stephen King in general is he's one of the few authors I've read that actually have attempted to put God right in a story, which is generally a no-no because if God could, if God does interact in that way, like he does in The Stand, or like he does in Desperation, yeah, that's the end of the story. You know what I mean?
Yeah, where do you go from there? Exactly. But yeah,
exactly.
And The Stand, he literally reaches in, his literal hand to interfere with the story, which Stand one of perhaps my favorite Stephen King novel of all time. But
me too.
Yeah.
But Desperation's available on audio as well, and Desperation is almost yeah, but it's abridged. It's kind of a funny thing. See, Stephen King was always insistent on unabridged audiobooks since the beginning. He was one of the few authors who had that power. So anyway, I know a lot of people think that he needs to be edited. But anyway. Oh, there's Jesse. But anyway, Desperation and a book called The Regulators both came out at exactly the same time. Remember, he did one as Bachman and one as Stephen King. And because they were both big and released at the same time, he agreed to lengthy abridgment of both. And then they released both audiobooks at the same time. I can't remember who read Desperation, but The Regulators was read by Kathy Bates.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's really cool.
You know what? I should look that up because I can't remember who read Desperation, but I listened to that audiobook a long time ago. But anyway, my point was that's a really good novel. It is a horror novel, but yet it's a really good novel about what the world could be like with an active God in it. Trying to portray that a little bit, trying to do that in fiction is really difficult.
Yep. Yeah, and Stephen King's not afraid to kind of tackle some of those subjects.
No, he's not.
Yeah, and you do see that in Carrie early on, that he was starting to explore this stuff. Carrie's unique in that he also throws in a lot of, the way he wrote it is unlike most of his, I think any of his latter novels. He uses a lot of like court reports from people that survived the incident with Carrie, and he uses some novels that folks, who again survived Carrie's rampage or telekinetic rampage throughout the town. I guess again, listening to him talk about how he wrote his first book, he has a lot of sticking points, as many writers do, and he broke through it by kind of incorporating all these different elements of various books, various news reports, newspaper reports, and I think it works. I think it's a great book. Unlike some common criticism of Stephen King is that his stuff is, as you said, heavily in need of an editor, way too long. You get into a Stephen King novel, you're looking at 600-700 pages. Carrie, I think, in paperback form was 280 pages. It's a pretty quick read. It's there's only seven discs on audio, and very enjoyable. I recommend that one too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I just looked these up. It turns out Kathy Bates read Desperation, and Kate Nelligan read The Regulators.
Who's Kate Nelligan? I don't know Kate Nelligan.
She was Canadian British actors from the 70s.
Oh, okay. Leave it to Jesse to come up with a film reference.
You bet.
Sorry.
No, that's good stuff.
I think she's an audiobook narrator as well, but not one of recent vintage. Or at least not here.
Uh-huh.
Maybe in the UK.
Yeah, and Stephen King's audiobooks, man, every one of them has great narration. Always different.
Mm-hmm.
One that sticks in my mind is Delores Claiborne. Have you ever heard that on audio?
I have not, no.
That's
actually one of the books I haven't read of his, actually.
It's really, it's not typical, but you're right. I mean, he did kind of shift gears there, and I'm not sure if that was written in that period you're talking about. What a fantastic audio. Francis Sternhagen read that one, and it's terrific.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, King he's very frank about that point in his life. He said he actually wrote Cujo,
yes.
Drinking beer nonstop, and he said he doesn't really recall writing a lot of the scenes in that book.
Uh-huh.
He said he enjoys it. Looking back, he said he wished he could have enjoyed it at the time, but he doesn't remember even doing some of it.
You bet.
And then the Tommyknockers was probably his worst, and I thought that was the first real stumble in his career. To me, that novel was very uneven. Some of it didn't really make much sense to me. He did bounce back with some good stuff later on.
Have you read any of his latest stuff?
I haven't. I'm trying to think of the latest stuff I've read by him. I've read. I just listened to actually On Writing, which he narrates himself.
What a great book. What a great book.
Oh, that's a terrific book. If you're an aspiring writer, there's a lot of good advice in there. I mean, and a lot of good nuts and bolts advice. It's not so much, how to construct sentences and, the theory of writing. It's more about how he actually starts, what his work day's like, how he gets himself to write. And I enjoyed that. And he read that himself, and he did a fine job. He was a good narrator.
Yeah,
he doesn't have the best reading voice.
More personal. Makes that one
it does.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. The latest one that I heard, and Stephen King, by the way, being an audiobook fan, since the first Stephen King audiobook I heard, which I can't even remember what it was, but since then I listened to his audiobooks. I don't think I've read one in print for, at least 20 years. But,
wow.
I just love his audio. He's perfect for audio. He's one of those authors that his style is just perfect.
Yeah. He's a very visual writer, I guess you call him, and you can imagine when you listen to it, it does translate well to the audio format.
Right. The latest one that I heard was Duma Key, and I liked it. I liked it very much. I thought it was.
Was that a free giveaway somewhere? I can't remember.
No, I actually got that from the library.
Okay, I remember you talking about it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I haven't read Duma Key. I have to get back into the Dark Tower. I read the first 3 books when they came out in the, in the 80s.
Funny,
yeah,
and you're very similar to me in reading. I've probably read as much Stephen King as you have, and but I haven't read the Dark Tower series. I don't know why, but I've read the first two, and that is something that I want to go ahead and do because I've heard such good things about it. But it's not typical Stephen King, and I don't know why I haven't jumped all over him, but for some reason I haven't been completely excited to get into him.
Sometimes I'm hesitated to start those long, lengthy series. It's one of the things that I dislike a little bit about modern fantasy. It seems like every modern author has to write a 5-book or a 7-book or a 10-book series with no end in sight, and it's it's a big investment of time. If it's there's the danger that it can peter out halfway through, that he could authors lose focus when they do that long. They get lazy because they just want to include everything in there. I'm not accusing King of that. In Dark Tower, I've only read the first 3 and I thought they were quite good, but it finished in 7 books, so at least there's an end in sight to that. Unlike some of the other recent fantasy series that have come out, I'm thinking of Wheel of Time, where unfortunately the author passed away before he could finish it. And then of course J.R.R. Martin, who's terrific. We've been waiting now for I think good 3 years since his last novel, and the date keeps getting pushed out on that. So. Oh,
I know. Yeah, I'm eagerly awaiting that one as well. But But yeah, if you think, he planned 7, I think, and wow, that's going to be a long, long time.
Are those available on audio, by the way?
They are, yeah, they are. The first 3 are read by a guy named Roy Dotrice, who's kind of a gravelly voiced fella. I know he was on Babylon 5 briefly. I don't know if it was just an episode or not, but anyway, Roy Dotrice. And then the 4th one is read by John Lee, who is also an excellent narrator, but completely a different style. So I'm not sure why they switched. But John Lee is kind of regal, British accent, very smooth narrator, and Roy Dotrice is a very earthy, kind of gravelly voiced narrator. And what they should have done is used a combination of narrators. It would have been neat if they had taken each chapter, the point of view of each chapter, and assigned each character an actor or an actress. That would have been kind of a way to do it, yeah. Because some of them are regal and and some of them are not.
Especially where each chapter is written from a point of view of a character, it seems to me to be pretty easy to do. But
sure.
But then again, you have to pay all those readers for their work, so I imagine that might have been a stumbling point.
Probably so. Yeah, and they're huge books.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, they do exist on audio, and the audios are pretty darn good. But I read those in print before I heard them.
Yeah.
These really long audiobooks, I'm finding I'm having a lot of experience with them lately. I'm listening to Pandora Star now, which is 40 hours long.
Peter F. Hamilton?
Peter F. Hamilton, yeah. It's 40 hours long, this thing.
You are a glutton for punishment.
Yeah. But yeah, it was thrown my way by Audiofile magazine.
Okay.
So I'll give that a listen. But I don't know.
When do you listen to audiobooks, Scott? Do you commute to work, or do you just listen to
No, actually, I live in a small town, so I can practically walk to work and do on good days. And when I do that, I listen then. I take walks, and when I'm doing other things, I listen often while I'm doing other things.
Okay.
I can get, usually a couple hours a day is normal. Is what I get in, Some in the morning, some in the afternoon, some in the evening. How about yourself?
Yeah, I have an hour commute to work, which is not ideal.
Mm-hmm.
But I found myself, this is a couple of years ago. It's amazing. I've only been into audiobooks for a short time, and I was driving into work every day for an hour in and an hour back, and listening to some lousy radio stations, and hearing the same 5 AC/DC songs over and over again.
Yep.
And I like AC/DC, but that was the truth. And so I just said, hey, how can I fill this time? And I checked out an audiobook. I can't remember what it was. It might have been the Stephen Pressfield book, but it was terrific. It was, I felt like I found something that had been out there for a while that was under my nose the whole time. It was a kind of a treasure, and that's where I get my listening. And so I get about 2 hours a day of time to listen to a book, and it's time that I never have that much time to sit down and read a book.
No.
But to listen to it is doable in the car.
Yeah. And that's pretty much how I started in earnest as well. I had an hour commute. I lived an hour away from this town, as a matter of fact. So I drove here every day. And
I think you should move farther away.
I should, so I get more time.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm going to get 40-hour audiobooks, I mean, how am I going to ever get through those things?
Or you could just quit your job and become a truck driver, because then we would have a lot more reviews out of you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Think cross-country trip.
You too, Brian. Can you be a truck driver for me?
Yeah, there we go.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, every now and then we have truck drivers here that, come from all over, and take our stuff all over, at my regular day job. Mm-hmm. And so every now and then, I'm not really in the shipping department, but sometimes I end up talking to one or two of them. And, a lot of audiobook listeners amongst truck drivers.
It's like it's like a prison, right? Everyone in prison reads, no matter how boring, how non-intellectual you are. If you're in prison, you're reading because you got all this time to fill, and it's the best thing ever to fill that time. And in a truck, it's like the same thing. You're in a prison, except you can't read because you'll drive right off the road. So
the one drawback to actually. The one drawback to listening to audiobooks in a car is that because I review them, so I'm jotting down notes. So I frequently look down for a second too long than I probably should have. Or I'm digging for a piece of scrap paper because something popped into my head while listening to a book, and so it's not quite as dangerous as texting or maybe as talking on a cell phone, but occasionally that does happen to me.
Yes, we do not recommend you take notes and drive at the same time. Pull over safely to the side of the road.
Well, on my hour commute to work, I've seen people do about everything in a car. So
yeah, that's good stuff. Good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Right. I try not to do short stories in the car, because then you have to keep better track of the plot points, and you have to say more in a shorter amount of time. Usually, a novel can sustain. You can keep whatever thought you had going because the story is not finished.
Mm-hmm.
But short stories I have to do at home.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, I find with short stories, if I've got a collection or something, it's hard for me to listen to short story after short story after short story. It's almost like, when a story is done, I need decompression time or something. And when I listen to story after story after story, I lose interest very quickly. But I think it's like, hey, I'm still thinking about that first one. Ooh, wow, that was neat. Now I'm on this next one. Holy cow.
But doesn't mean you don't listen to them over the course of 2 weeks. It just means you don't listen to them back to back.
Exactly. Yeah.
I just finished listening to the sci-fi mini masterworks.
Oh, yeah.
What is it called? Yeah. Mini masterworks of science fiction.
Right.
By Infinavox and Allan Kaster, editor. I'm writing up a review for that, and that's how I felt. It's like the transition time between the stories is, wait, I gotta pause, think about the end, last sentence, and consider.
And they do that. It doesn't seem like it's very often. They used to do this all the time, where they'd take time to put a little music in between them. But now it's just like you hit the period at the end of the story, and then he's reading the title of the next one. Almost. Well,
I think the problem with the Mini Masterworks collection is not that he didn't want to do that. It's that he's got 9 stories and 3 CDs.
Yeah.
And I noticed very strongly in a couple of the stories that like it had actually been edited for time, so that breaths were taken out, and sentences that had a half-second pause in between them were reduced so that it would all fit. And I think that's kind of unfortunate because it doesn't serve the story better. In a way, paragraphs and placement of text on a page is just as important as other points in the writing to break up the flow of the story and the flow of the dialogue. And pauses are important. Pauses mean something. And when it was edited like this, it feels like it's almost like been abridged, even though every single word's in it.
Yeah.
So that was one thing that kind of bugged me about it.
Interesting. But other than that, were you a fan? I mean, did you enjoy the stories?
Great stories.
I'd heard that one as well. So,
some of them are I had heard Kin before because that was on Escape Pod, I think, and it was also the free release from this collection, available for free download, and it's a good story. Some of them are better than others, but lots of it's like he does know what he's talking about, and anything Allan Kaster says, listen to this, it's going to be good.
Sure.
The worst stuff he picks is still really good.
Yeah. I agree with you.
So I'll have that out soon, I hope.
So I noticed on your website, Brian, that you're mostly into fantasy. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it is.
So not a lot of short stories in fantasy, right?
No, there's not much to actually in the field of to offer. It's pretty much when you get into fantasy, you're selecting the novel out of it's the only choice.
Well, I've always do you think that I guess it depends on what type of fantasy you're talking about, but it seems to me that the milieu is way more important in the typical fantasy novel than in the typical science fiction novel.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I'm thinking out loud of the J.R.R. Martin books, which are to me the best example of the modern fantasy novel. They're anyone who hasn't read them is missing out, I think. But they do. I think J.R.R. Martin's the exception to the rule. I think the length of his books, he does such a good job of explaining the world and explaining the characters in it that it works. I think a lot of other novelists, fantasy novelists, probably out of just reasons of publishing reasons and money reasons, if they can sell, if you get X number of readers of a fantasy book, well, you might as well split it up over 3 to 5 books because you've got a captive audience there that want to see the series finished to the end, so you're going to sell 3 to 5 times more books. But it's not necessarily worthy of that kind of exploration. I think of J.R.R. Tolkien, Middle-earth. To me, that's still the benchmark for all other fictional worlds. I think J.R.R. Martin has the potential to be in that same breath, depending on how he finishes the series. But I mean, it's a blessing and a curse if you like to really, I guess, luxuriate in these worlds and explore them. The modern fantasy novel has a lot to offer. You have a lot of big, lengthy series out there. Everything from Harry Potter to to Martin to the unfortunately never finished Sword of Truth series, and not Sword of Truth. I can't think of the author's name now. I got about 10 books up there. Robert Jordan. Yeah. There's this. Yeah. That's just the
current trend. That they're finishing that series? They've got an author to finish that series.
I heard that. I heard he had some pretty good notes he had left behind after he unfortunately passed away, and some outlines. And I haven't heard who the author is.
The author is Brandon Sanderson, who's he's published 4 fantasy novels up to date. So
Okay.
he's also
It's a free
he's got, what's
audiobook
interesting.
out on the
We did
website.
a review of Elantris, which is his first novel, and then he's written a trilogy called the Mistborn Trilogy, and the third book of the trilogy is out on audio, but the first 2 are not. So I expect that they're going to go back and do the first 2, because the third book just came out, and Macmillan Audio did that with the Ender series as well. You know, Orson Scott Card series. They published the latest one that's out, get that right out there, and then they go back and get the previous ones. So they also did it with Robert Jordan. In fact, they just came out with book 8 in the Wheel of Time series. But they have published over the last 5 years or so. I think 2 of them came out, and they put those right out. But then they went back and started to fill in the gap in between.
That's interesting.
But anyway, Brandon Sanderson is the fellow's name. Yep. And he's even got some stuff on his blog. It's brandonsanderson.com. He's got some stuff on his blog where he talks a little bit about it, and it's interesting to read.
And one of the things I was mentioning a few minutes ago, I think, was you guys have done some reviews recently of the Robert E. Howard Conan books. And to me, those are just so refreshing in today's publishing field. I mean, his stories are all short stories. They're published for the pulps, but he was a terrific writer. He was a very underrated writer. A lot of people have tried to imitate him or do pastiches of his work in future novels, and the ones I've read have all been pretty much dreadful.
Yeah.
They haven't been able to capture what made Robert E. Howard a great writer, what made Conan a great character, but I wish there was more like that, to be honest with you, in bookstores today. I wish there was some shorter alternatives, and you didn't have to, commit the next 6 months of your life to reading a series to get through it. I can't say enough about Robert E. Howard. It's strange. I have my 2 favorite fantasy authors are Tolkien and Robert E. Howard, which aren't normally thought of in the same breath. But
Mine too.
Yeah, they're kind of the 2 extremes, I guess. Tolkien spent his whole life working on creating his world of Middle Earth, and Robert E. Howard kind of wrote for expediency's sake. He was trying to really make a living. Tolkien was a professor. He was writing as kind of a hobby, and he was thrilled. He was thrilled. He was in mixed emotions when Lord of the Rings did so well, but he wasn't writing out of financial reasons. And Robert E. Howard, the reality was that he had to sell to magazines, and that kept him at a white hot pace. And some of his stuff suffered from it. But I think if you look at his overall writing, it actually aided it in many ways, in that he had to come up with so many different situations, so many different characters, and it's really eye-opening to compare it to what you can find in bookstores today.
You ready for my fantasy fiction rant?
Sure.
Let her rip.
Okay. All right. The reason why you like Tolkien and Howard, and you're sort of less enthusiastic about a lot of the modern fantasy, is because the modern guys suck. And the reason they suck is because they don't know anything except for Howard and Tolkien. And what did Howard and Tolkien know? They knew history. They're stealing from history or from other literary historical stories. Like Tolkien was very much influenced by Beowulf. I mean, basically, he's a scholar of that stuff. And Howard, I mean, you just start reading his names. Just his names are all stolen. They're all shamelessly stolen from history. Every country he named is either a real place, a real city that's been recast and renamed. I mean, he had a huge fondness for history and the dramatic sweeps of history. And what we get with modern fantasy is sort of a rehashed Tolkien, and they take all the best parts, the dramatic world building, storytelling, surprising, and they say, well, we'll just put it in a dungeon. and we'll have a dragon, and then that'll be a good fantasy story. Or we just have to have, it's like magic inflation. I think I was telling you, Brian, about why fantasy fiction sucks is because it's got so much magic in it. Fantasy fiction works best when the magic is talked about and rarely seen. You know, when it's known that it exists, but it's not common. And it's like when you're playing Dungeons and Dragons and the dungeon master doesn't care very much. They'll give you, you fight the dragon and then you get a box of gold. And the box of gold is the reward. And the way you can tell it's a good story is because there's more gold than there was last time. Well, that's not what I want. I don't want more gold. I want more story. I don't care so much about the...
No, I think you're right about Robert E. Howard. I mean, I'm not a scholar of Robert E. Howard. I've kind of dipped my toe in the water of looking more and more into his background and some of the literary criticism out there. But if you go to a website like, you guys have heard of the Sumerian.com, I recommend that website for anyone who's a fan of Howard. But the more you read about the guy, the more you realize that he was a fan of history. He actually said in one of his letters that he wished he could have spent more time as a writer of historic fiction. He said, I think one of his quotes was, there's more in a paragraph in a history book. There's about 100 story ideas in every paragraph you read in a history book. He says it's loaded with far more than you could ever find in fiction, in straight fiction. And he wanted to do more. Unfortunately, the reality was it took a lot of time to research that stuff. He had to do a lot of legwork. Of course, he was writing in the way before the internet era, so he didn't have the best resources at his fingertips. It was amazing how well read he still was, despite the fact he was living out in rural Texas.
Exactly.
And but yeah, his I think that does infuse all of his stories with a realistic edge. And there's many Robert E. Howard scholars who have argued that his particular strength was that he was a realistic writer. You don't think that. You think of his Conan stories as just kind of being a completely fictional creation, and Hyboria being an alien world, but it's actually, there's a guy by the name of Mark Finn who wrote a terrific, which I would recommend, I doubt this is out on audiobook yet, but it's called Blood and Thunder, The Life and Art of Robert E. Howard.
It really should be an audiobook, though.
It's a relatively recent biography of Howard, and it talks about how he argues convincingly that all his work was a product of his upbringing in Texas, and about the rough and tumble boom and bust oil towns he grew up in, where you still had some of the elements of the Old West mixed in. Even though it was 1920s and 30s Texas, you still had, bar fights were common. You had people making and losing fortunes overnight because of the oil wells and running dry. And it's a fascinating read, and I think it convincingly lays out the case that that Howard was in many ways was a realistic writer and a Western writer, and kind of in fantasy trappings.
Mm-hmm.
I recommend that highly.
The fantasy book that I'm really looking forward to, well, I guess it's not even fantasy, is I'm hoping it's available on audio. Yeah, it says it is. Michael Chabon, you know him? He's got a book called...
I don't.
Well, he was the guy who wrote the Yiddish Policemen's Union, yeah, which has been really doing very well in the reviews, and I think making some money as well. But I heard about this book a couple of times, and it sounds really good. It's called Gentlemen of the Road, and it's a swashbuckling adventure set in the Kingdom of Aran, which is A-R-R-A-N, which is Azerbaijan, I guess, now. Around 950 AD, and follows two horse thieves, a massive African Jew named Amram, and a hat-loving Frankish Jew named Zelkimin, as they become swept up in a rebellion and try to restore a displaced prince to the throne. The story deals with the Khazars, a Turkic people who embrace Judaism. See, this is like old-fashioned adventure story in a sort of a place and time we don't hear much about. That's my favorite kind of fantasy, is something that uses sort of maybe the tiny little fantastic elements. I don't even know if there are any in the story, but a sword and sorcery without so much the sorcery. I think people sort of get tied up in thinking that the sorcery is the most important part, whereas I think the sword's the really important part. But the other one I recommend is, and I'm trying to bootstrap. I've been asking publishers, a couple of publishers, why don't you make this into an audiobook? It'd be great. Henry Treece. Anybody read any Henry Treece?
Not
I have not.
Okay, Henry Treece is like he's an old poet, and he wrote a lot of historical fiction in ages gone past, from 1911 to 1966. So he's not super well known, but the one that I got introduced to as a kid was a set of 3 very slim Viking novels. First one's called Vikings Dawn, and that's about a young Viking kid who joins a Viking crew and goes off to raid some abbeys in Ireland or something like that. And then in the second book, The Road to Mikligaard, which is another name for Istanbul now and Constantinople and Byzantium at the time, is about the boy as a young man instead of a teen or whatever. He's a 20-year-old, and he goes off and joins an expedition to Istanbul. And they don't go the long way down the coast of France and through Spain and the Mediterranean. They go overland into the rivers and ford the rivers and mountains with their ship, and eventually become part of the Varangian Guard, which was like a Viking guard of the Eastern Empire of Rome. Constantinople had Vikings as their shock troops, which is really interesting and factual. And then the final book in the series is called Viking Sunset, and that's set when he's an older man, like around 60 years old, I guess. And I think one of the let me just see here, remind myself. He's enjoying a peaceful life farming with his wife and sons when his village is attacked, and his crew of Vikings reassembles to chase the Vikings who attacked them across the Atlantic, and they go from wherever they are, I guess is Denmark or whatever, and they go chase them to Iceland, and they're already gone. They chase them to Greenland. Oh, they're already gone. So they chased them to Vinland, which is, of course, North America. And that was like, wow, oh my God, adventures, okay, Europe's cool, but getting into North America, and they ally with some Hurons and chase down these evil Vikings. Amazing story, right? And done in 3 slim volumes that would fit inside the first fat fantasy and still have room for an appendix.
Me convinced. I think it sounds great. One of the books I recommend again is the Saxon Stories by. Have you guys heard? You must have heard of Bernard Cornwell. Mm-hmm. I think he's one of the better historic fiction writers today. I mean, his work's amazing, and he's currently, speaking of Vikings, in the middle of a series called the Saxon Stories, which are all available on audio. That's how I listen to them.
Mm-hmm. Oh, cool.
They're very, it's a lengthy series, but each one is self-contained. You really aren't required to have knowledge of the previous ones. He does a good job kind of, introducing the story, picking up where it left off. You might want to start with the Last Kingdom was the first one, but but I particularly enjoy it. I mean, he did the Sharp series, which I haven't really. I've read a little bit of.
I didn't like the books
fantasy.
that much, but I love the series, the television series.
I have never seen. I think George R.R. Martin is probably the closest I've seen, but in his descriptions of battles, if you like good battle scenes, Bernard Cornwell is the best. I mean, he in the Saxon stories, he's got the old Viking shield walls where the guys used to line up and shield to shield, and their shields would overlap. You trusted your life to the guy on your right because he was holding the shield, and it was more of a massive a weight of pushing each other. There was a lot of
contest.
It was nasty fighting. It was also hacking and stabbing under and over the shield rims with short spears and swords. And then if you like that stuff, if you like a little bit of gore, because it does have that too, but I can't recommend those books highly enough. It makes me realize that I'm glad I'm living in the age that I'm living in now. As much as I like to read that stuff, I don't think I'd actually want to be on the ground in a shield wall. But
you know what? The best battle novel that I've ever read is The Killer Angels by Michael Shaara.
Oh yeah, I have.
What an awesome book that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about the Civil War, Battle of Gettysburg, I believe.
Yeah. If you go on the Silver Key, I have one of the first posts I did was I rank all of the books I've ever read on a very scientific 5-star system. I don't know how I came up with it. And The Killer Angels is one of the handful of books I've given 5 stars to.
Cool.
I thought it was absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
It again gets outside of what we're talking about here today, but highly recommend it if you want to learn. If you're a fantasy writer today and you want to figure out how to do a realistic battle scene, you could do a lot worse than to pick up The Killer Angels and look at how he describes Gettysburg, which was just an absolute bloodbath.
I'm looking at your book ranking list.
Yeah.
This must have been taken from your journal.
Yeah, a lot of those books were previously reviewed in my journal. I have to update that with some of the recent ones I've looked at lately, but
0 stars.
Yeah, it's just a way.
Neuromancer. What?
I wasn't
0 stars.
I wasn't able to finish Neuromancer. So if you look at my 0 stars,
cut short because this guy's off the podcast and he says Neuromancer.
I got to give that one another try. But yeah,
that's a great audiobook too. Not Neil Gaiman. William Gibson's reading. It's a bridge. That's the only bad part. William Gibson's reading of it is very strange in that he's not an actor, but he does a good job reading his own stuff, and it's got music by U2 in it as well. But yeah, you can't give Neuromancer 0 stars.
Well, 0 stars, if you look at it, is not necessarily a bad book. It's one, for whatever reason, I wasn't able to finish. And I read that so long ago that I don't recall why I put it down. It may have been I was young and it blew my mind too much, and I didn't know what was going on, so I put it down.
Backpedal.
Because those book rankings date back quite a ways, man. Yeah, I am backpedaling a bit there because I know it's pretty much regarded as one of the cornerstones of science fiction.
It's a beautiful book. It's a beautiful book. It's got a great story. It's very gritty, very yucky story. It's got like a scene I really like is sort of exemplifies the story. They go up to a space station, right? And what do they do up there? The main character gets drunk, takes drugs, passes out, and is expected to go to work. And I'm going, well, why is this our hero? Like he's such a loser. But the way William Gibson writes is he makes everything cool, even stuff that shouldn't be cool. The way he's full of great ideas, and everything's firing perfectly. And in his later books, all that style, the great writing is there, but the story is just not strong. Now, see, if you would you'd said, Count Zero by William Gibson or something else by William Gibson, I've had a lot of sympathy for that. But Neuromancer's the only time, he got it perfect.
Well, now you've convinced me to try that book again. I will do that.
Good.
That's my take-home homework from this podcast.
Give you lots of work. I noticed you have the Dark Worlds of H.P. Lovecraft Volume 5 on your 4.5 stars. That's
that was the audio that I got from you guys.
Cool.
It was amazing. That was read by Wayne June.
Mm-hmm.
If there was ever a voice made for H.P. Lovecraft,
I think
Wayne
we might
June.
have him on next week.
Really? I'll have to listen to that. I'd love to hear if his.
Yeah.
He
sent me a review copy of something, and there's a nice letter in it saying, dear reviewers, if you would like to have me on the podcast, something.
Oh, you got to do that. You got to do that, Jesse, because
but
the guy
he wanted us to give him a list of questions beforehand, and I said, I don't think we can do that. It's more of a conversation, right? Because I don't know what questions to ask until I talk to you some. So maybe we'll have a pre-talk to allay any issues. But yeah, it's that should be pretty cool because he's got a voice to scare you.
Yeah,
and he does a great job with those.
And those particular, I forget what three stories that were read. He read, but in that particular series. Mm-hmm. But it was certainly one of the better audiobooks I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
I think H.P. Lovecraft's one of those authors whose stuff, even though his writing style is hard to get into, it's a bit verbose. It's a little bit, I guess I don't want to call it dated, maybe a little bit dated, but something about it works on books because again, I think he's a very descriptive writer.
Yeah.
And it certainly was just a great marriage with him and Wayne June.
Yeah. He's
Outlurking Fear, Haunter of the Dark, and The Thing on the Doorstep.
I think
you can't go wrong with Lovecraft. I mean, those titles alone make you want to read them.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. It's true. I think the way Lovecraft wrote, he had like a thesaurus sitting right in front of him because he says, "Wow, I've got to write this story. It's got to have a lot of creepy words in it. Think of some creepy words. Okay, I'll look up blood." And then looks up, actually he wouldn't talk so much about blood. Rotting. Looks up rotting and he finds 15 words for rotting. And one of the things I do in class is we read the statement of Randolph Carter and I just go through and I show how many different synonyms he has for tomb. He's got 14 different words that all mean tomb in that horrible ossuary and in that creepy sepulcher. He's a real lover of the sentence, that man. Some people like the storytelling. He likes paragraphs, but really he loves the sentence.
Yeah. I'm from Massachusetts, so I live in an area that is featured in some of Lovecraft's stories. There was an amazing old asylum that's located about 20 minutes from my house over in Danvers. It's since been unfortunately demolished and turned into a wonderful set of condominium complex. But
creepy condo.
It was called Danvers State Mental Hospital, and it's actually featured in a film called Session 8. Session 9.
Okay.
I was off by a digit. But I highly recommend it. Kind of a not well-known horror film. It came out in the late 90s, but it's
Did you
it's
say
filmed
session or section?
Session 9. Session 9. And it's filmed on location. They didn't use any or almost no special effects. It's just they just rolled the cameras inside this creepy old asylum, and that asylum's actually mentioned in at least a couple of Lovecraft short stories, not prominently featured, but some of his characters that, of course, they all go insane at the end of his stories.
Just like
supposedly wound up, yeah, they all wound up there. And then I drive through witch-haunted Salem every day on my way to work. So Lovecraft, for that reason alone, has always been a little more personal for me, because although it looks a lot different nowadays, it's still kind of neat to be in the areas he's describing in his books.
Did you happen to attend Miskatonic?
Miskatonic University? No, I haven't. Yeah,
no
I'm still looking
pods.
for it.
I wasn't
Something like
accepted.
No. You apply and you apply and you apply, but scholarships are hard to get.
Yeah.
This has been the SFF Audio Podcast. Please join us at www.sffaudio.com.